Evolutionary Org Hardcore 2.0 coming your way. It's episode 125. Today we're going to talk about training while isolating specific muscles we tend to ignore by Euro Pharma. So in this one, it's going to be a really important one. We're going to talk about muscles we ignore, reasons people ignore some muscles, training examples to reach muscles, how steroids can help you balance those muscles you might be ignoring, and why we appreciate Euro Pharma. So first, let's talk about muscles we ignore first. So, we talked about in the pre-show a little bit. Mobster has a lot of different examples. I mean, the big one to me, there's a big one and there's a little one I'll bring up first, and I'll bring in Mobster. The big
Yeah,
one
yeah,
is upper body versus lower body, and a lot of people don't like to train their lower body. They like to go to the gym with pants and then like wear like a stringer or like a wife beater or something. They want to show off
yep.
their upper body, but they hide their lower body. Um, and this is a mistake a lot of people do. Over the years on the forums, people have said, Steve, what does it matter? I don't care about my lower body. My lower body, nobody looks at my lower body. Nobody, women don't care about lower body. They're like, it doesn't matter what you train. If I want a strong upper body, it's my business. Well, it does matter. And second of all, women are very observant. And I can't tell you how many times women have said, wow, you have big legs, you have big calves, you have big quads. They notice a guy who has skinny as hell legs and big upper body. It looks weird. It looks weird. Another thing, too, is imbalances. You've heard the cliche, a strong tree, with strong leaves and strong branches needs strong roots. And it's true. So as you build your lower body, it will allow your upper body to flourish more and you'll build it. And creating imbalances like that doesn't make any sense in the intermediate and long term. You may be able to get away with it in the short term, but it's going to be a problem. I'll do a couple more from Monster. We're talking about the front lower leg. And this is something I never see people do. Never see people do. Even guys who look really, really good. There's a muscle, it's called the tibialis anterior. And if you keep your foot planted and you lift your toes up in the air and you feel the front of your leg, you'll feel that muscle pop up. And that
Yep.
muscle, when you're working your calves, okay, you're putting your heels up in the air and you're working your calves. You can do the same thing. Put your foot flat, then lift your heels up in the air and feel the back of your leg. Wow, those are your calves. And you'll notice your calves are way bigger than when you lift up the front. Now, it is a bigger muscle, so it will be bigger. That's normal. But a lot of you may not even be able to feel the front lower part of your leg, any muscle, because you're not working them. So what I do is when I work out my calves, I also take the time to do a set after I work my calves of my front lower legs. And the way I do that is simply by lifting my toes up in the air and doing a lot of volume on it and letting them get a nice burn and squeeze. And that
Yep.
helps build those up as well. So you don't want to end up with that. I can go up your upper leg, same thing, hamstrings versus quads. This is
Yep.
something that
Yep.
I went through myself back when I was really going through a growth phase in my late 20s and a strength phase where my quads were getting big, big, big and strong, but my hamstrings were not following. And a lot big reason why I wasn't doing things like lunges, I wasn't doing the hamstring curls. Nobody even touches the hamstring curl machine at the gym. No, it's not, you know what I'm saying? It's nobody does that. But everyone loves doing upper body curls, but no one likes doing lower body curls. But you have to balance those out. One of the things I noticed when I was doing like kayaking or canoeing, I sit in the kayak or canoe and I wouldn't even be able to sit in a 45-degree angle because my quads were so huge. And when that happens, when you grow that much and your quads are that fucking huge and your thighs are that fucking huge because of squats, and then your hamstrings aren't growing along with them, you're going to create an imbalance. And that can have problems later on. That will actually lead to injuries because now you're not working, you're not balancing out the upper part of your leg. So it could lead actually to hip issues, knee issues, more
Yes.
problems because you have that
Yes.
imbalance going. Plus, you're not going to be flexible as flexible and as mobile in your hamstrings, and that in itself could lead to injuries. I can't imagine someone playing football, American football or soccer, any of those sports, and getting twisted a certain direction and not
Yeah.
having that mobility and flexibility. And what's going to happen is things are going to start rupturing and things are going to start breaking. So it will.
It used to be a huge issue, Steve, for a lot of players, both sides of the Atlantic, and for some of them, they never come back from those injuries because they've never been coached to train those muscles that we're talking about.
Yeah, it is. It is a big issue. And then I'll finish out with upper body, the same thing, back versus front. How many people walk around the gym with a belt, okay, and they have their chest is puffed out like they're a fucking whatever animal that does that, like a fucking what are those things called? The birds with the big tails. What are they called?
I know the bird. I know the bird you mean, but I don't know the name of the bird. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's like a mating display, and they literally
yeah,
puff up their chest for the females to be
peacock,
attracted to them.
peacock.
Yeah.
So people walk around the gym like a peacock, showing off their
Yeah,
chest,
yeah, yeah.
like big, I got a big chest. And their back is weak as fuck. They can bench 300, 400 pounds, but they can't even row like 50 pounds. So they have this huge imbalance and they walk around with their shoulders all curled forward
Yeah,
because
pulled
their
forward.
back
Yeah.
is so fucking weak. And again, we
Yes.
go back to what I said. You're going to develop injuries. You're going to develop a weak spine. You're going to
Absolutely.
develop disc problems because you're not building a strong back. So you're walking around with prorated shoulders all the time because your chest is so fucking strong and your back is so fucking weak. But I'm not saying that you're going to be, if you can bench 400 pounds, doesn't mean you're going to row 400 pounds, but you should at least have some sort of realistic ratio, maybe a 2-to-1 ratio. I don't know. Where,
There is a ratio. I shall
good.
address it now that you mentioned it. Actually, in terms of the ratio, guys, it's roughly, I believe, 60%. So, for example, in the thigh muscles versus the hamstrings, the bicep femoris, you're looking at roughly 60%. So, wherever you can leg extension, let's say 100K, 220 pounds, you should be able to ham curl, leg curl, standing, laying down, whatever version you like to do. There's versions when you're seated and you sort of curl the weight underneath you. You should be doing roughly 60% of whatever the leg extension weight is. And that's for balance. That's literally, for example, in life, assuming you play no sports, lift no weights, the muscles are there to balance each other out. Bicep versus tricep, pec muscle versus back muscle, and so on and so forth. And literally, for example, if you didn't have the opposing muscle, in the case of, say, for example, your bicep, then you would be, in essence, Steve, constantly slapping yourself in the face. Your hand would be in that upright position, and it would be kind of impossible for you to straighten your arm back down. So the muscles are there to balance that. In sports, as Steve quite correctly says, and I'm just going to address the injury issue because most of our listeners are going to be training for the aesthetic, for the bodybuilding. Again, that's our demographic. But for those of you that do other things and the percentage of listeners that are just athletes, the risk of injury in the muscles that you're not training is huge. And as an example, one of the very first things that I read about training when I was not even a teenager, Steve, used to have comics here, Victor and Wizard and wherever else. And one of them managed to run a story about a soccer player. And of course, soccer players, they will sprint down a pitch, same as American football players with a 40-yard dash, get tackled, turn on a sixpence, as we say, trying to go around a player, skillfully flick the ball from one foot to the other foot. And again, all of these things, your strength on your quad and the strength in your glutes is powerful. You are sprinting down a pitch, you're jostling players out the way, etc., etc. When you need to run backwards, when you need to spin, curve the ball around a player, when you're doing all these other things, the side strength, either side of the knee is comparatively weak. And your hamstring, the muscle at the back of your thigh, the bicep femoris, is relatively weak. And in those days, they were getting paid very small amounts of money. There wasn't really strength and conditioning coaches and so on and so forth. And especially if they had an injury as they got older or whatever else, these would be career ending. The story that I'd read was a soccer player of some renown, I can't remember his name now, brought what we call an iron boot, which is essentially, it's like a very heavy sole of a boot, but it's made out of steel or iron. And you can still see these old weightlifting things on a marketplace on Facebook, etc. They're still sold. Very rare because we've got leg curl machines now, of course. And you would strap this boot on like some sort of super heavy roller skate, Steve. And he was doing leg extensions, some weird things at the side, and leg curls while he's watching his TV back in the day. So every time the adverts come on, he would do this leg exercise. He was able to return to the pitch, but he was one of very few players that could do that. And he was essentially doing what we now call the sports therapy or rehab. But in those days, it didn't really exist. You had an injury, they might operate if you were very, very lucky. We're talking about the 60s and 70s here. And that was it. And again, even then, if they operated just to reattach muscles or whatever else, wasn't with the sophistication and technology and the medical ability we have now. So for most athletes in those situations, that was it. Your career was over. You are not playing for Arsenal. You're not playing for some big name UK football match team, and you're certainly not getting paid 2 or 3 times the average salaries. Now, hundreds of thousands, if not more. But in those days, I think they were on 75 quid a week, but the average man in the street was on like 10 or 15. Now, of course, it's £250,000 plus, same as American football players, big money. But in those days, it was big-ish, but you were fucked. That was it. Your career was over. You might have been 25, 26 years of age. Now, the reality of that situation is some of our listeners play golf, some of our listeners play soccer, pickleball, or whatever it is that Steve sometimes mentions, basketball, just among their buddies. And how many times have you seen people with knee braces on, elbow braces, shoulder braces, etc.? And these are amateurs. These are not professional athletes. These are amateurs. In the professional league, there's almost a percentage required. You're going to get an injury at some point. You're playing at the very top end of your game. And so, as Steve has said many, many times, when we talked about certain American football players, the ones that stay do a lot of therapy, that's almost a given now, Steve, as soon as you come off the pitch. The ones that are working with coaches in their own time, in other words, the off season, the ones that don't need to go back to camp to get in because they've been doing stuff all the summer when they've been away from the game, and so on and so forth. And I've said many, many times, and this applies to bodybuilders as much as it does strength athletes, the percentage of time spent by strength athletes is roughly 80% of the time that they're in the gym, of the same amount of time. Let's say it's 4 hours, 3 hours, maybe more, is spent on therapy. So literally, I've seen strength athlete videos. You guys can check this out on YouTube. They're in the gym in the morning. They're training for strongman competitions, and the afternoon is spent on therapy, rehab, recovery, etc. And a good strength and conditioning coach, including with these top-end athletes that you'll see on World's Strongest Man, Steve, doesn't just have them practice the lifts in competitions, but he works on weaknesses. He works on weak points. So we need to understand, even for ourselves, the moment you guys get vaguely serious about your physiques, the moment you guys get vaguely strong in the gym, there is two things that's going to happen. You're either going to have massive gaps in your physique, and I'm going to address that in a moment, or you're putting yourself at a risk of injury. Let me get into the actual physique appearance stuff, Steve. In the pre-show, I said we're going to talk about the very top-end bodybuilders. So it is almost funny the way that certain physiques are described. If you're new to the bodybuilding and you go to a competition, you'll be sitting and the guys in front of you say, "Oh, that athlete's got no legs." And you go, "I can see his fucking legs from here, Steve. He's definitely got something between his hips and his ankles. Those look like legs." But what they mean is, of course, that relative to his upper body, his legs are poor. You have no calves or no neck or whatever. And again, this is all relative. But what they're really talking about, of course, is where that athlete is on stage, probably an amateur, and occasionally a professional would have been able to get away with it. And it'd be things like they look amazing from the front, but when they turn around, there's no back. And we know almost a thing now where they say the last half dozen or so Mr. Olympias have been won from the back. Literally, Yates and Haney and whoever, Derek Lunsford brought his back up. Samson Dualda's now got a good back, and so on and so forth. Perhaps not on the level of Yates or Haney, but certainly their backs are nothing to be sniffed at. And if they turn round and there was nothing going on related to what was happening at the front, they'd be marked down. So we have a handful on our forums of guys that do compete, classic, physique, and bodybuilding, and specifically masters springs to mind, Steve. And one of the things that they quite often do, and this is just as an example of how important these things are. Let's say that they place, do well, but they don't win. One thing that you're supposed to do, if you've got any sense, is you go and speak to the judges afterwards. Could I have a word? And it's the long and the short of it is normally to ask what could they do to improve their physique to get a better score at the next competition. That's a little bit of a way of ingratiating yourself with the judges. You can call that political if you wish, but at the same time, it's actually sometimes useful. So we marked you down because your tan wasn't. We marked you down because we could see that you got Ghana. We marked you down because your insertions aren't quite as good as the fella that won. The reason you came second is because of this. The reason he came first is because of that. We think, or I think, that particular judge, if you just brought your arms up a little tiny bit, it would balance your physique out and so on and so forth. As an example, and I actually questioned him about this recently, on our forums, we've got a very, very good logger on the Oz forum specifically called Pigsy. And I was like, Pigsy, why are you doing that inner thigh, outer thigh machine, the abductor, adductor machine? And he says literally that he'd had a conversation with a judge at competition, Steve, and recommended that he fill in the small gap that he had at the top of his thighs to balance out his physique. Now, you see photographs of Pigsy, Steve, fantastic upper body, really, really good upper body. The lower body is nothing to be sniffed at, it's pretty good. But his most muscular is probably one of the best on the forums. With maybe with the exception of the late Monstro. And even without a tan, you're like, Jesus Christ, he's all veins and sinews and tendons and striations in the chest, etc., etc. So I can imagine that's probably his pose, the best pose he has. But I don't think we've seen back poses from Pigsy. And I think we have seen leg pictures, and especially from the front. And the angle of the camera makes you go, oh, that's pretty good fucking legs there. But the judges are comparing him not just to who we see, i.e. himself, alone in the photograph, but to other athletes. And there's a lot of athletes, Steve, bodybuilders especially, that look great on their own. And then you put them next to the other pros and you start to see gaps in their physique. So what we're looking at here is a combination of specifically if you are athletic, basketball, pro ball, soccer, whatever else, mitigating injury with training the muscles that oppose your strong muscles, oppose the muscles that you're actually using. And in the case of bodybuilders, filling in the gaps. Trust me on this particular one. If it was a toss-up, and I'm thinking of young guys here, Steve, and how young guys think and how they try to attract women, etc., etc. And we see this even now. You've got mates, buddies, who will have a six-pack. I think Steve and I have talked about the skinny guy with a six-pack. Will always have his shirt open, Steve, and he'll always make sure that his abs on display, but he'll wear long trousers to hide his skinny legs. Whereas the guy with the legs, always, as much as he possibly can, be wearing shorts. I've half joked that my last body part to get covered up when the winter comes is my forearms, because for the stuff that I do grip-wise and for my size, my belly is disproportionate. It's out there full of ice cream. But my forearms look very muscular to the point where, as Steve said, people have actually, including women, commented on my forearms. My sheer size helps. But again, you could, if I was a bodybuilder, which I'm not, my waist is way too big. Whereas the rest of me is relatively in proportion. And if I had a slimmer waist, I'd look like something fucking else. And again, it's that weird situation. If it was a toss-up between me and someone with a complete physique, I would lose all fucking day long. Absolutely. If it's a toss-up between me and someone else, and my waist is small, my shoulders are wide, etc., etc., then my forearms are going to catch your eye. They're almost disproportionate in that particular regards. Not quite, but nearly. And I've got very good arms, I would argue, in my own opinion, humbly, for when vest type tops, or as a wife beater, as Steve said, walking around the gym, for my age especially, never mind anything else. And again, I'm very big, so it's, 19 inches cold and all that kind of bullshit. I think I've had my forearms, Steve, have been to 17 inches at one point. So just to give you an idea, and that's muscular 17 inches, not fat 17 inches. So it's that balance, it's the look. And trust me on this again, just before we finish on this particular topic. We've used this idea before. We've taken someone that's never been to a bodybuilding competition. Come along, it's an experience. I'll buy you a drink, I'll get you a sandwich. I'll pay for your ticket. and you sit them down. And 9 times out of 10, Steve, they can choose the top three from the lineup, even if it's 20, 30 guys, 20 or 30 women, because they will know what looks right. They will know what flows. And if you said to them, why do you think number five's not going to win? Oh, is something missing? And they're all, it kind of gets complicated once you get experience and knowledge. But because they've taken this, I've never been before, this is the first time I've seen it, they get it straight away. They will know what looks like a good body. They will know whether it looks like a model, whether it looks like something they've seen on the TV, whether it looks like Superman. They will know. And it will be things that you and I, perhaps because we're more experienced, we're looking at other things, looking for that guy with the cross striations, looking for that guy with the serratus. We're not looking for the gaps in the physique because that's our man, that's our fella. We like him. He's one of our boys, etc. And we lose that sometimes. I think the final thing here, Steve, and this is just from the winners stuff. I have been around top bodybuilders, top strength athletes, etc. I've been to some high end shows in the past. I've competed, heck, on the strength stage at the Arnold Classic back in 2010, doing what I was doing. So I've seen figure fitness girls. I've seen top pro bodybuilders. I've been to quite a few top pro bodybuilder seminars. And every so often, you will see someone, I think Phil Heath's been described in this particular way, as being quote unquote 3D, meaning they had depth, they had width, all the muscles inserted into the right places. There was no gaps on their physique. They would do certain poses and everything popped. Nearly everybody else, and I'm going to include the great Arnold Schwarzenegger, would have gaps in their physique, could have been leaner at times, could have had better quads, had good quads, but not at every competition. Had a bicep head on one arm that was shorter than the other one. So there was a gap between the bicep and the elbow when he was doing the bicep pose, and so on and so forth. But his ability to quote on psych people out and also to pose and hide his weaknesses is what enabled him to become multi-Mr. Olympia. But for the most part, you can't hide now. Instagram won't let you hide, even with filters. The videos of photographs on competition are instantaneous now. Magazines have been and gone, and we see stuff. The only advantage they get is that when they do these videos, when they put up photographs of themselves, it's normally just them in the picture. But we see on stage, and I think even the younger guys now are much, much better at seeing what looks like a winner's physique versus what doesn't. But so we're going to give you some suggestions here today, guys. We're going to talk about how certain exercises, certain body parts can be an absolute bastard to train in the next section. And we'll obviously hopefully give you a few ideas about things that you can do to balance your physique. And maybe it's just something guys can do for the next 2 or 3 months in these winter months over Christmas as we record this show before it goes live in the next week or so. Something you to add to your training, just as a little nuance, something different, and maybe doing something slightly different to become more stimulating and give you that little jazz that you like from your training and getting you hungry again. And Mobster and Stevesmi are sort of pushed me to do this, and I feel fucking great about it. Look how much more awesome I'm looking than I was before. So let's move on, Steve. So we're going to talk now about the reasons why certain exercises, certain body parts are incredibly hard to train. Steve touched upon in the intro calves. Now, I don't train my calves. Again, I'm more of a strength athlete. On the rare occasion in the past when I've trained them, it's been horrendously hard, Steve. I get that kind of lactic acid burn very, very quickly. Now, I don't mind that on chest or forearms or biceps or triceps, but on my calves, it's like it's positively painful. I've talked about the VAR pumps in my shins being more or less crippling walking to town one day before. So talk about the muscles that people train because they or don't train because they're difficult, and even ones on yourself physically where it's been very, very hard for you to train those muscles because it's been so brutal to train.
Yeah, and it's not just that, buddy. It's one of those situations where you're doing things in the gym which are not allowing you to do it that you don't even know you're doing. I'll give you an example. One time I was hanging out with a buddy of mine, and we started to train at the gym together. And in his back seat, he had some gloves. So I'm like, "Oh, you got some bodybuilding gloves. You mind if I, try them out?" And he's like, "Yeah, go ahead." So I tried them out one day, and I came to like them. I mean, I was able to grip the bar better. The sweat wasn't as much of an issue. So I bought my own bodybuilding gloves. I think it was like $6 at the time. All right, this is back in fucking the late '90s. Okay, And I started training with gloves. Now, over the course of 6 months, guess what started happening? I started to develop forearm splints. And what those are, it's like an inflammation in the soft tissues between your bones and your forearms. And then my wrists started bothering me as well because they weren't getting worked. Like the muscles around the wrist, the tendons around the wrist, things started changing all the way from the elbow, from the forearms to the wrist to the hands. Things started changing because I was wearing gloves. Because when you wear gloves, your grip improves. So it's like cheating. So when you're not using certain things to grip the bar, then you actually develop things stronger while also developing things weaker. So your imbalance gets wider and wider. And the same goes for wraps, straps, and belts, and anything that can give you an advantage in the gym, like doing rows or deadlifts with straps, where you strap the strap to the bar and then you strap the strap to your wrist. You're getting an advantage, right? But it's also making you weaker when you do that lift. Because now when you don't lift with the straps, you're like, wow, something's off. I'm not able, I can't even do like 50 or 100 pounds less when I'm doing it. What's going on here? So you're developing these imbalances without even knowing it over time. And it's going to catch up to you because you're going to develop these injuries and these nagging injuries and these issues that you wouldn't even think was possible when you do. I could think of a meathead gym I used to work out at. Some dude used to walk around with a belt on, but the thing is, the belt was like to the side, like the front of the belt was like on the side, and he'd walk around the gym wearing a belt no matter what he was doing that day. He just wore a belt. And when you do that, you're hurting yourself. You're hurting yourself. So I would say in 90 to 95% of situations, minimum, you should be training raw. I train raw. I don't wear belts. There's so many times in the gym back when I was lifting really, really heavy in my 30s. I had guys come up to me and be like, "Oh, you want to use my belt? Do you want to use my straps? Do you want to use my wraps?" And I say no, and they look at me all like, "What?" I'm like, no, I don't use them. And they're like, why? Why don't you use them? And I sit here and I explain and I educate the same way I'm doing. I don't just say, no, I don't use them. They're for pussies and walk away. No, I sit here and I educate people like I'm doing to you
Yeah,
guys, and I explain why. And I hope this makes sense to you. Why I don't believe in wearing that stuff. Now, if you're like Mobster and you're training in competitions, then yeah, you
yeah,
can use that stuff on some of your reps, but not all, on some of your reps, and then in competition, whatever is allowed to be used in competition, etc.
yes,
But
yes,
for 99% of you, there's no need to ever use any of these accessories, even chalk. We hear people talking about, oh, my gym doesn't allow chalk. It's a blah, 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 blah. They complain about chalk. I said, fucking, I don't blame the gym for not wanting to allow chalk because it's a mess. But number two, you don't need fucking chalk to lift. You think our ancestors, when they would run for miles chasing down their prey, then get their prey and have to pick that prey up and carry it back, you think that they were like, oh, wait a minute, guys, I got to get my gloves to carry this animal back. I got to get my wraps and straps to carry this animal back. No, they carried it back. There was some hunters. There's a story where, or in hunting season in Midwest, there's people dropping dead like crazy, Mobster. You know why they're dropping dead? Because they're getting heart attacks because they shoot the deer, then have to drag the deer back a mile,
mm,
right? And they're dying because their heart is in such bad shape because yeah, they're a big man with their fucking gun going around and shooting an animal, but they can't even fucking drag the animal back because their heart is so weak because they eat nothing but garbage and they clog up their arteries and they're overweight and they're obese. So how does that make any sense, guys? You gotta think about it, the way we evolved and the way we adapted. So how does it make sense to go hunt for an animal and not being able to take it back because you're so fucking weak? You're going to get a heart attack if you do it. So it's the same thing with wrap straps. So think about it. Think about it logically, guys. When a cat is out there hunting for a mouse, you think he's like, oh, wait a minute. I gotta stop and grab my strap to give me an advantage so I can catch this mouse. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So you have to you have to realize this, that you're hurting yourself. I had a guy on the forum one time argue this with me, and he's like, Steve, what does it matter? If I want to wear gloves, it's my business. I said, it does matter because you're going to end up developing imbalances. Your wrists are going to get weaker, your hands are going to get weaker, your forearms are going to get weaker, your elbows are going to get weaker. Okay. And you're going to create a huge imbalance, and you're going to end up having nagging injuries, and you're going to end up getting weaker in certain areas. And you see people who train with gloves day in, day out, they have smaller wrists for a reason. They don't develop their wrists. Their wrists have to grow along with the rest of the body. Your hands have to get stronger along with the rest of the body. When you're deadlifting, the idea behind deadlifting is to make your hands and wrists stronger as well. It's not just, working your legs and your back as people think. It's also making your hands stronger to the point where you can open a jar of, sauce or whatever without needing, to get a hammer and kind of hit it with a hammer. You can just pop it open with your hands because your hands are strong. How many times have you been with someone in their house to dinner and they come up to you and they're like, I can't get the jar open. Can you open the jar for me? And you like, boop, you pop it open. That's what happens. That's the strength of your hands. But if you're wearing gloves and straps and wraps and you're cheating and you're not allowing your hands to get stronger, you're not going to be able to open that jar. So you're going to develop that imbalance. So there's something wrong, Mobster, with people who can deadlift 600 pounds, but they can't even open a jar. Doesn't make any sense. It's because they're weren't, they're doing all these.
One of the issues, and it's just more of an aside here, Steve, guys worry about calluses and they'll talk about how the girlfriend wants their hands to be smooth and they work in a professional job and they don't want calluses because they're not laboring or physically whatever else. I don't have any calluses, not one. If I've got any calluses, Steve, it might be on my feet, certainly not my hands. And the reason for that is my grip. I train my grip, I train my forearms. And so specifically, my hands, when the one grip in the bar doesn't move in my hands, doesn't slide around. I sweat the same as everybody else. I do use chalk on certain exercises, but again, I'm training for specific events. I'm not using them on bench press, for example. I'm also possibly slightly tongue in cheek here, Steve, that if you're going to get gloves, make sure that handbag matches in that kind of half joking thing. But yeah, seriously, guys, I have no calluses. My volume is relatively low compared to some people, so there's a part of it. And I've even had the back and forth over the whole straps thing. Okay,
Yeah,
for
just
example,
to interrupt you, Monster, I won't do it
yeah,
again, really quick. But the calluses make your hands stronger. That's the fucking point. Literally, the calluses are making your hands
yeah, it's
strong.
what your body's done is your
Yes,
body's adapted to what you're doing.
because
In
I don't
fact, so
get
the
callus.
skins,
I used to get
yeah,
calluses when I was younger. Now I don't get them either because my
no,
body has adapted and my hands got
exactly.
stronger. My palms got stronger.
Steve makes a very good point. In fact, think about it this way, guys. Rather than us beat this big callus, weak hands drum, think of it this way. Your body with a callus has adapted to the fact that it required thicker skin to stop getting injured. And that's exactly the process that's happening in your body. When you train your biceps or whatever, your bicep gets stronger or thicker or harder, wherever it is that you're focusing on in your bicep training, as a result of the stress, like your hands getting calluses, your body gets bicep gets thicker, stronger, more muscular, harder to the touch, etc. Like a callus, as a result of the stress you're putting on your body. So, without banging that particular drum too much, I mean, here's the thing, guys, right? You are looking to create a certain look. Might be a model, might be a photo gig, might be a beach holiday, and so on and so forth. I mean, we've actually seen, I think there was on a Big Brother show here in the UK, and this particular person was the head of some gossip agency type thing where like TMZ or something like that says, where they made money from the gossip about Hollywood and stars and famous people. And he had ab surgery. And I believe he had some sort of weird ab implant put into his physique. So he had the body of a person that went to the pub, went to the club, went to the bar. He literally had scrawny arms and a fat ass, etc., etc., etc. He literally looked like his day job was drinking cocktails all the time. And yet he had a six pack because of the ab implant. We know when physiques don't look right. And what our listeners are looking for is a physique that looks right and is injury free. So I'm going to say specifically, and I say the calves that I mentioned earlier on, forearm training, for example, Steve, which is another sometimes weak. You have great biceps and triceps, guys, but your forearms are weak. And as Steve said, that means weak grip. And it doesn't just mean with the jar opening thing or whatever else. Forearm training, like calf training, can be brutal. There's only a few exercises you can do, and they all work. There are some bicep exercises that are better than others, some chest exercises that are better than others. But when it comes to forearms, whether it's holding a pair of dumbbells and walking around the gym, using a wrist roller, or just doing straight, good old fashioned forearm curls, either forward or reverse for the underside, the flexor, or the upper side, the extensor muscles, they work. And they work really, really well. Honestly, 3 sets of 20 of either of those two, and you will have veins, your forearms will be red, and you will get a motherfucking pump from hell. Slightly better than the calf ones, it has to be said, more pleasurable. Can be actually uncomfortable. I've had it where it felt like my forearms were being microwaved down to the bone when I've done wrist roller work, especially the volume stuff, Steve, and especially when I was chasing the pump and more muscle size over strength, and so on and so forth. But let me deal with the other ones. For example, we talked about already training the front, what you can see in the mirror versus not training the back. So, as an example, Steve, you want shoulders that are wide. We call them boulder shoulders, shoulders like coconuts, etc., etc. What some people miss out on, and this includes people that like me, like to bench press heavy weights, is rear delts. And your rear delt is surprisingly important as a stabilizer for the back of your shoulders on bench press. But again, a 3D physique, a physique that a champion will have, has all three heads of the delt developed. Now, if you're bench pressing or overhead pressing, you have to be careful not to do too much front delt work. And we still see people that do that, but they're very rarely doing heavy presses, Steve. I see the guys that do that steering wheel thing where they've got the 45-pound plate held up almost to chin height, and they steer it backwards and forwards with their arms straight. And it's a great side and front delt worker. But you very rarely see them doing heavy bench pressing. So they almost need to do that. Your heavy bench presser, your heavy overhead presser probably doesn't. But the bench pressers not working his side delts as a bodybuilder would. And a physique competitor will 100% need to work the front, the side, and the rear. Anything that's out of balance. As another example, Steve, certain muscular physiques, we won't see the spinal erectors. And on a proper muscular physique, you have almost an indentation coming down from the traps between your shoulder blades, between your latissimus dorsi muscles, and all the way into your groin, into your arse muscles. And there's a proper deep groove there, which shows all of the muscles of the back are developed. And then you will have a small line either side of that groove where the spinal erectors go into, again, you'll tie into your glutes. You'll see muscles like, which you can train with straight arm pullover, Steve, called the teres major. This is a little diamond-shaped muscle that sits underneath your delt, but on top of your lat. And it ties in those muscles in the armpit. Now, you'll see occasionally people do called lat activation exercises, which I think is a bit pussified, but there's an argument maybe for the gap in the physique being filled with something like that. And again, with a straight arm pull down, or arms ever so slightly bent, arm pull down, done straight up, you're not sitting on a pull down machine, and you're literally trying to focus on that tiny little area, probably only about 3 inches or 4 inches by 3 or 4 inches wide, on a bigger physique, where the armpit is below the rear delt and above the latissimus dorsi. So there's stuff like that. You'll see, for example, very broad, and I'm actually thinking of the very famous bodybuilder from a long time ago, Steve Reeves, who was very wide looking, had a very square chest, small waist, Hollywood looking face, but he had no traps. And in the modern physique, on the modern stage, he would lose because he had not developed his lat muscles. Now, on his physique, it probably looked wrong, it probably looked ugly. But on the bodybuilding stage now, he would lose on that. Certain bodybuilders, and I'm thinking, for example, John Grimek, and I mentioned Arnold already, would pose in a way to hide their physique. But you can't, for example, Steve, hide muscles when you're standing, what they call standing relaxed. When you train this pose and that pose and that pose, but there's another pose that you're weak in. There's muscles, for example, again, this is the front and the back of the arm, where I would train both the flexors, which is the muscle underneath. I make a muscle like Popeye, but the muscles on the top. And Phil Heath's got a great set of arms in that particular regards, where the brachialis, brachii or brachialis muscle sits between your bicep and tricep and extends down to the middle of your forearm. And on Phil Heath, it looks like a bar of fucking chocolate. It almost looks like a brick, small brick that's been stuffed underneath that gap. And on his physique, it's like Jesus Christ. Got the flexor, which is the big underneath muscles, and this huge, great muscle on the top. I've also noticed on the older bodybuilders, it's one of the first muscles that seem to disappear. And again, like Steve said, if they're using straps too much, which again the older athlete will do when they've stopped doing heavy hammer curls and so on. So let's talk a little bit about training some of these movements. I'll do one now, Steve, and I'll bring you in. Steve's mentioned already, and I'm actually going to give you a pro tip here on the thigh bicep or hamstring muscles, i.e. the muscles beneath your backside, your gluteus, and that tie into the tops of your calves. Now, we've got in my gym, Steve, a lying, which I'm using right now, leg curl machine, a seated, so you're sitting up and the muscles tuck underneath, and a standing, we're lucky in that particular regards, bicep, let's say thigh bicep curl machine. On this is the pro tip, and it's I've done this just to demonstrate to people, and even standing outside the machine, demonstrating the movement in a certain way, makes my thigh bicep light the fuck up, Steve. So talk about muscle activation. You will see people using the standing leg curl machine, and very, very quickly they kind of lean over the machine, which puts them at the same kind of angle as the lying leg curl. Very few lying leg curls are flat. Most of them have a little bit of a pivot, a tilt, where the hip, the upper body's laying down flat, but there's almost a slant downwards, depending on the design of the machine, from the hip down to the knee. And then obviously your ankle is touching the pad to call the weight back up again. In reality, it's actually probably better for you for that particular machine to be flat. And in the standing leg curl machine, you will see people lean over the machine, which puts them in the same angle as that angled lying leg curl. But what you actually want to do is stand the fuck up from the shoulder, down the back, under through the hips, down to the thigh, hooked under that pad, and then the other pad, the actual part of the movement, that should be straight. And if you lean forward, you're taking tension off. And I can actually do this, Steve. I can lean over the machine without actually being on the machine, and I'll get a decent activation in my thigh bicep. But if I stand the fuck up, it's like I'm flexing my biceps on my upper arm. So there's ways of working these things. Come onto the forums, ask these questions. This is a bit weak. We need to work it, etc. Let's talk about now, Steve, Euro Pharma steroids that we know that are going to help people fill in the gaps in their physiques as well as the rest of their bodybuilding journey. You can start.
Yeah, and let me start with Dianabol. And Dianabol was the first steroid I ever used. And one of the things I noticed right off the bat was the improvements in the way it makes your muscles full, and it gives your muscles a lot of size. And it really increases the pumps and everything. So it's a great tool. If you're attacking a certain muscle, you brought up the Pigsy example earlier. It'd be a great way in the off season, even if you're a professional bodybuilder, to really attack a certain muscle, and it kind of be like a cheat code because you're feeling the pumps. Let's say the judge tells you got to improve your triceps. Your biceps look good, but you got to improve your triceps. So you can go and start doing your triceps, do rope extensions, anything to really hit those triceps, and then you'll be able to feel the pump. You'll be able to feel the triceps growing, once those nutrients really go in there. So Dynamo is a great option. You could do it by itself.
Steve, sorry, there's even an argument to be made for the pump stretching the fascia, which will allow that tricep to grow. So that's a great reason for using D-bol as a pumping movement, pumping the steroid.
Testosterone also, it's another one similar to Dianabol because it's gonna kind of fluff up your muscle and give it more size. So that would be another option without water retention and stuff like that. So it'd be a good way to kind of hit those areas. They're not going to be great cutting options, but they're going to be great options to kind of bring up certain areas and improve strength. And I think we've seen enough evidence, anecdotal evidence, to know that if you improve your strength on a certain muscle, then it's going to be forced to grow. So if your triceps or biceps or vice versa, or your hamstrings versus quads or whatever you're trying to balance out, chest versus back, upper body versus lower body, if you can improve your strength, then your muscles are almost forced to come up. So strength steroids, testosterone is a great strength steroid. Anything androgenic is a good strength steroid. Trenbolone, very androgenic, great strength steroid. That would be another option. So with tren, you'd want to run anywhere from 200 to 400 milligrams a week, and then you can make a decision on what to stack with it. With testosterone, if you're only running a small amount of testosterone, this is a good rule of thumb. If you're running a small amount of testosterone, 100 or 150 milligrams a week, that's essentially a TRT dose. So that's not going to be androgenic. You've got to jack the dose up of testosterone, 300, 400, 500 or more to really get those androgenic effects. So if you want to take it from the strength angle, where I want to get stronger, trenbolone's a great option. Moderate to high testosterone's a great option. Dynamo's a great option. Anadrol is another one. Now, if you want to do a short 5 week cycle, you just want to use an oral, Anadrol will be a great idea. And you can run 50 milligrams a day. There's a reason they're called A bombs. So you'll get incredible strength and mass improvements within 5 weeks of using Anadrol. It's a really, really good option. And then one more, I'll add Superdrol. If you really want to see a change in 2 or 3 weeks, Euro Pharma has excellent Superdrol. It's the cleanest Superdrol that you're going to find, and it's not going to be as toxic as some of the other Superdrols because they use quality fillers and ingredients when they're making their orals. Mobster?
I'm looking just now, Steve, on a Europharmacist page, and I'm looking at, I think this is a new product. They've got something called the cutting mix. They've got a product similar to a lot of our companies with the rapid cut. Trust me, guys. I mean, these particular steroids are going to help you get lean and get into shape. Diet and cardio on point. The cutting mix is 300 milligrams, Steve's combination. The rapid cut is almost certainly a combination of tren, testosterone, and masteron. And here's the thing, guys. If there's going to be any gaps in your physique, you're going to see them when you're cut. So again, like Steve says, we want to make sure their physiques are complete. And we wait, make sure that, like Steve said, one of my favorite ones that Steve touched upon was as an oral steroid, Steve, is Anavar, guarantees the strength. And listen, all things being equal, there's always going to be examples to argue the toss. Well, all things being equal, that Steve said quite clearly, stronger tends to be bigger. And even if it only gets you stronger in the short term, it allows you to lift more weight and then more volume with different cycles and different periods of the year to train in a particular way. So, for example, Steve, Anavar, 50 milligrams a day, 4 to 8 weeks, has always maxed out my strength. And again, you come on the forums and we give you advice of keeping as much of that strength as possible, the proportion that you're going to keep between cycles, and using that to increase the volume on your exercises to fill in the gaps in your physique again. As an example here, Steve, you're cutting down, you've noticed gaps in your physique. Now you want to, and you've worked on those weaknesses, you want your muscles to look a certain particular way. This is great for holidays. So I'm thinking, again, Masteron, Steve, and they've got some different combinations here, plus some blends, where you're using Masteron to harden your muscles. So no, not only are hopefully the ladies complimenting you on your arms or your six pack or whatever else, but when they come over and they give those muscles a squeeze, Steve, they feel rock hard. Talk about that story of yours where you went to see the massage person and she actually commented on you using Masteron and how hard your muscles were.
Yeah, and I said that story. She said, I've never felt someone with such hard muscles before. And that was while I was on Masteron. So I knew that the Masteron was really working. And it felt like I was sleeping on rocks at night, So that would be a good option if you want to harden up an area that you're trying to build up. That would be a confirmation right there, doing Masteron. So if your back is really not showing itself and you go on Masteron, you start training your back like a madman, then you go get a massage and she says that to you. She's like, "Oh, your back is so fucking hard. Your muscles are so hard on your back." Then you'll know, yeah, I'm making progress balancing out my back. That would be a confirmation for sure.
Here's another one, Steve. Primo Depot, 100 milligrams. Again, this is on the Euro Pharmacy's page. As a way of keeping your hard-earned muscle. We don't want you to work the gaps in your physique. We don't want all that fucking work you've put in to go to waste. And Primo, when I've talked about this before, and Steve and I have discussed this on other shows, as a means of retaining the muscle at the same time as you are cutting. This is the reason why it used to be in the 70s, and it's actually been gaining in popularity now. and people are using it. They run it at different dosages, of course, when from what they were doing in the 70s. But again, even in the 70s, they were using Primo to keep the hard-earned muscle, to keep those gaps filled that you'd worked so hard to complete your physique with. You've taken the advice on training that we gave you earlier on. What would you run Primo, Steve, at if you was cutting down and you was using Primo as part of your stack?
Yeah, so the average dose is going to be 500 milligrams a week. I don't really see any reason to run anything else. I know Arnold back in the day he used to like to run it at 100 milligrams a day. And back then they were doing 100 milligrams a milliliter. So your pharmacies, they provide a good primo that isn't going to give you crazy post-injection pain. They have different options. That's the nice thing about Euro pharmacies. They have it all. They listen to their customers. They have different variations of these steroids. They have different esters of these steroids. They have different milligrams of milliliters of these steroids to fit what you're looking for. And that's really good. That's a good thing. So more options are a good thing because you can mold things in your direction. They didn't have that option in the 70s, Mobster. They
No,
really had only four steroids that they had access to in those days, and they had to take it, whatever, the good and the bad. And the post-injection pain of the Prima was really bad. You could only do 1 cc at a time because the post-injection pain was so bad. So they were forced to run it on a daily basis. But now with the Europharmacies Primo, you can run it at a really, really good dose. And you don't have to
I'm
worry.
looking at the Euro Pharmacy's page here, Steve, and I'm looking down at the 10 mil products. We've discussed 15 mil products on other shows, and I'm looking at what looks to me like, Steve, a new label on pretty much every single 10 mil bottle here. I'm looking at the 350 milligram blend, the 450 milligram blend, and these look like a new design from before. And I'm going to talk about this as well as talk about Euro Pharmacies in and of themselves. So Steve said just now, quite clearly, they listen to their customers. And this is something that I've discussed on other shows. We'll talk about why Europharmacy is a great brand in and of itself. But let me just touch upon this before we go into that. So they look at what sells, they look at specifically what you've asked for. What what do you want in a blend? Can we produce a product that does everything you want in a cycle without you having to mix these products yourself? Whether that's drawing up out of two vials and putting it into one vial, you still can do that. You can still I want 500 milligrams and 300 milligrams of that. I don't want what's in the blend. But equally, you've asked for blends and they've given you blends with the typical ratios of steroids that people like to use. It might be tested amphate, it might be a trend cutting mix. And how much are you going to use if you created the mix yourself? Well, we can do that for you. They're not resting on the laurels. They don't have a design that's 5 or 10 years old in terms of label design. Just recently, I think last year or the year before, Steve, they started doing the triple layer peel off labels on their products. So not only did you get the usual top level information, you peeled back that layer and you had two like pages, one still on the vial and the underside of what you'd already read, which gave you information, for example, on dosing, talks about the typical use of the product and so on and so forth. So that was one. They've tried different colored tops just to see what catches the eye of people and so on and so forth. So then, like I said, I'm looking at their page, the actual Europharmacist page, not a reseller's page, and some of these products look like they've redesigned them again, Steve. So they're not sitting still. They're not waiting for other companies to sort of push them out of the marketplace. They're constantly on the go, looking for product development. If something's not working, it's gone. And I just mean in terms of sales, Steve. Solid products all day long. But people just aren't buying that product, well, we're not going to keep it. We're going to give you, the customer, what you want. So let's talk about now, Steve. I'll let you do it and I'll finish up why Europharmacies is a good source in and of itself.
Yeah, and your farmer, look, they're appreciated by many because they have the best products that are legitimate. You never have to worry about getting fake products when using them. They also have excellent customer service. They're always there to help you with your orders or you have questions. So the reps are on the form. They're very strong. They're not fly by reps that just come and go or that are unprofessional. They're there to help. They're there to give you advice and they're there to help you get the best body possible. So we really are blessed that Euro Pharma
We are.
is part of our community on the forum, and we definitely hope that they'll be around for many, many years.
Yes, Steve, we've had one of their reps interviewed on one of these shows, and the phrase that people like to use, especially when it comes to UGLs or whatever else, is this particular person is a stand-up guy, super friendly, super helpful. Him and at least one of the other reps, specific Europharmacies reps, create articles, create threads, all of themselves with particular discussion topics, get people thinking. They've even challenged us by suggesting topics to discuss. What do you think about this, guys? How would you do that? And we've gone, that would make for a great topic on one of these shows. And we've done that. Most people don't. It's just push the product, get you to sell, etc., etc. Saves 100%. All of our approved sources have good customer service, but I'd actually think Europharmacies probably stand out as an example. And again, that's just dealing with the reps. The two that I've mentioned already, they're really, really good at dealing with any issues on the rare occasion that it occurs, become rarer day by day. Again, all the approved sources are quite good at that. You're also looking for, and we've discussed this multiple times, they are one of the standout companies, and you won't see this on every forum that you go to, and you won't see this with every source on other forums. But for example, they post on the forum themselves, as well as obviously updated reseller sites and the main sites, these certificates of analysis. We've had one of these particular products tested. The example, let me just give you an example, Steve, of what you want from any approved source. And Europharmacies were really, really good at this before I finished the show. And it was this particular thing where a product had been done for them by a third party. Normally it's in-house, their own production facilities, which I believe are based in Turkey. And these products go worldwide, international as well as the domestic market. And this one particular product had been developed, they'd had someone else make it for them. And it fucked up. Perhaps like some of the more dodgy labs, the product was great to begin with, but the moment it fell off the cliff, they seen it testing, customers had got in touch that had it tested, they tested it themselves, and it was not up to scratch. And I believe they handled that within 72 hours. From the first test coming back to 72 hours later, they credited customers that had bought this product. They dealt with it, they removed it from the product line, they no longer dealt with the company that they were working with in that particular regards, and they credited the customers that had bought the product for the last 2 or 3 months. And this was all done, as I say, I think it was like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Steve. That's how quick they are. These guys are, like I said, they're online. I know the particular person I'm thinking of is super great, and he works in construction. So how the fuck he finds the time to be as good as he is? And he's a much nicer person than I am. That's why he was so good when we brought him onto the show. And they're just Europharmacies themselves. I've used their products. Steve's used their product. My stash of products here is all Europharmacies, and that's no exaggeration. I've used other company products and found them great. That's why they're an approved source. But my daily staple, my daily go-to is Europharmacies. And it's that because literally, as I said on another show, Steve, when I referred to the tagline that a company here would use for DIY products, and I can't remember the name of the company, but it does what it says on the tin. Debo is Debo, and it works the way Debo's supposed to work. Trend is trend, and it works the way it's supposed to work. There's no fluff, there's no bullshit. They haven't asked around. When products, as often as not, when COAs, certificates of analysis, test results come back, as often as not, Steve, they're slightly overdosed than they are underdosed. They won't pretend 100 milligrams is 100 milligrams if it's 98.6 or if it's 102.3. They will show you the test results whether they've either put too much in or it's a tiny fraction under. Every single product that we talked about tests being done independently by third parties, and we mean literally members of the forum. Europharmaceuticals was part of a particular test that we've spoken about on other shows, which was 10 products from 10 different sources. And all of those sources, including Europharmacies, was well within the range that they're supposed to be. Better, it has to be said, than the industry standard for pharmaceutical companies, which is, I believe, 10%. So in other words, a 200 milligram Advil tablet can be 190 milligrams, or even less, 180 milligrams, 10%. Whereas our products, the products we had tested, including Europharmacies, were 2 to 3% deviations, either under or over, well within the allowance. Nothing failed. And in fact, the person, we talked about this on a show that we recorded yesterday, where we said he actually expected 2 of the 10 products to fail, and he was surprised that every single product passed. That was great for the forum, great for our listeners, great for the members, and great for the companies, including Euro Pharmacists. So that's the sort of stuff that we like. It's the reason why we love and approve Euro Pharmacists. Please note, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It's our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.